It's Jimmy and Bob back from Joint Ops Properties. We're going to do a video about what does Joint Ops and McDonald's have in common.
I'll give you a hint. It's not the French fries.
And we are going to praise McDonald's in this video, but I'm going to start the video by saying I think their food tastes like absolute dog shit.
Terrible.
Like, when was the last time you ate there?
It's been years.
My kids love it with the playgrounds and all that shit, but it just tastes, the beef patty is just disgusting.
Yeah, it does not taste like real food. Anyways, moving on.
Yeah, every entrepreneurial book you read, it's like McDonald's doesn't make a great burger, but they're everywhere. Why? Yeah. Systems.
Systems, yep.
That's another commonality, but we didn't put a slide about that. Okay, so I have a big man crush on Ray Kroc and McDonald's right now because of this book, McDonald's Behind the Arches. I got curious because of that movie, The Founder. It's
a great movie. I really enjoyed it. Anybody who's an entrepreneur or just loves entrepreneurship should check it out. I think a lot of it was played up for movie. To try to
they made him look like
try to dramatize it as much as possible. But I thought it was fantastic. Very well done.
So it's I was listening to a podcast with two of our mentors, Ron LeGrand and Mitch Stephen, and Mitch asked Ron, like, what's a book that got you started? McDonald's Behind the Arches. And when someone like LeGrand says, this book interests me.
Oh, I didn't know that's where you heard about it. Very cool.
Awesome. I bought the book while I was listening to the podcast.
Yeah, I ordered it yesterday after you mentioned it. So,
and it's a pretty easy read. I'm usually a slow reader, and this has gone fast. So I can't put it down. And the reason we're making this video is because this book is a great example of how traditional financial thinking is just absolute garbage. And you'll never, ever, do you think any regular financial planner ever thinks about how McDonald's built their business?
No, not at all. They just, read the latest Susie Orman book and regurgitate it.
Yeah, and Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey make their money by selling their Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey shit to people who buy Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey crap.
Yeah, the biggest thing is like, they say, they give all this great financial advice, but then they've made all their millions from selling education and creating a business. So I don't know why they don't turn around and
They should be telling everybody to start an MSNBC show and to start a business educating people on how not to ever succeed.
You got to make money first before you start investing it.
And I just had the thought, but that's basically what the traditional education system does as well.
Oh, totally.
So, all right. So we're going to show you the clip from the McDonald's movie where they say, hey, you're not in the burger business, you're in the real estate business. So we'll see you in a second. You good? You remember what they said?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. So what did we learn by watching that clip? BJ Novak, what was it? Harry Sonnenberg was his real name, is talking to Ray Kroc. And he's talking about his cash flow issues because no bankers would lend to him on just a burger business, right?
Yeah.
So he had to show some sort of asset. And what do bankers love lending on?
I mean, I got a big idea, and that's real estate. Right?
Real estate. So once he made the paradigm shift that he was in the real estate business, it brought in automatic cash flow because the franchisee had to pay him rent to get into McDonald's. Buying the land and the building created an asset on McDonald's asset sheet. So as they're paying principal down every year, they are also able to go to bankers and refinance out any equity. That created capital to go buy more McDonald's. So having these assets allowed McDonald's to receive more bank money and institutional funding because real estate is something bankers will actually lend.
Yeah. I mean, yes, there are business loans and lines of credit and everything else, but it is pretty difficult to go raise capital for anything that's non-permanent. So fixtures, equipment, restaurants go bust every day of the week. The restaurant business is a very tough business. I mean, McDonald's was able to systematize it and to really crank it out, but the money was not being made by dishing out the burgers and fries. That was just basically covering the cost of the overhead to pay off the underlying real asset, which was real estate.
And this whole book, the whole time they're talking, we are not in the burger business, we're in the real estate business. So McDonald's is a real estate company who use lease options and owner financing, aka creative real estate, to make these deals happen. So I'm reading this book, and this is fascinating what they would do. So they would need a piece of land, and then they would need a building to cook the burgers and sell the burgers, right? So it's two different things. So they would go in, they'd find a plot of land, and they would owner finance the land from the current landowner with no down payment.
Okay.
And the current landowner's like, I'll do that deal. I'm making nothing on this land right now.
Yeah, it's just sitting there, not cash flowing. Just you got to pay, taxes on it, and not making any money. So they're like, all right, I'll take some cash flow. And also the landowner is like, okay, they're gonna put a building on my property. The building's not walking away, so they're making my land more valuable. So even if they're paying full market price for the land, the landowner's collateral gets a huge bump as soon as they start construction.
Right. But they could not have gone to a bank and said, please loan me money on this land. The banks outright would have said no. So then they got the land covered, and now they need a bank loan. The banks would lend on a building with a 20% deposit once the land was purchased. So now the banks are lined up, but now they still need to find that $20,000 deposit. And we're talking the 1960s when this was happening. So they try to grow at about 100 a year. So that's a big, huge capital that they would need to find for those down payments.
That's a lot of money.
So $15K was the minimum down payment for our franchisees. McDonald's would then they would take the $15K from the franchisee, send it to the bank as the 20% deposit. So we're at the point in the deal where they now have a building, land, and none of their own capital is in the deal.
I mean, this is genius. And this is, you have to be creative
if you want to scale.
If you want to scale quickly. If every time you want to expand, you need to come up with your own money, you're creating a bottleneck. So they basically said, all right, how can we eliminate the bottleneck? And this is what they came up with.
If they would have used their cash flow from burgers for that 20% down payment, there's no way they could have ever scaled. It would have been a slow. They also bring up in the book that White Castle had a 20-year head start on McDonald's, but they could not expand because the CEO of McDonald's would not use leverage.
Interesting.
So that's why, like White Castle is still around, but only drunks really eat there, right?
Yeah, and it's never.
I've only ate there if I've been completely.
It's not outside of the Midwest, to my knowledge. There might be a few here and there, but they're not.
That's a good point.
They're not national. And they're definitely not global like McDonald's is.
Even though they had a 20-year head start on them. So then, just like us, any other real estate owner, the franchisee was the tenant, and they could tell the banks, "Hey, I have guaranteed rent coming in." The rent would cover the cost of the loan of the building, and it would also cover the owner finance note, and there would still be cash flow at the end of the day.
Yeah, so basically out of thin air, by putting together, a landowner who's willing to owner finance them, a franchisee is going to come up with money to pay the down payment to the banker for the construction. They basically coordinated this whole dance and created cash flow and a $1 billion empire out of nothing. It created financing. Pretty cool.
I love it. I guess I can't put this book down. Oh, and then also in the book is our other favorite subject to always talk about.
Life insurance.
So it goes throughout the book that life insurance is part of the lifeblood of McDonald's birth. So Kroc didn't take $1 out of McDonald's for 8 years. Because if you watch the movie, he had that shitty franchising deal.
Yeah.
So before real estate, McDonald's Corporation, Kroc's ownership, not the McDonald's brothers, was operating at a loss.
Yeah, because he was just getting a royalty fee off of
a very small royalty from a 15-cent burger.
Yeah, so it's tough to make money that way.
So occasionally he had cash calls in order to meet. Payroll. So where did he go to meet payroll? The liquidity in his life insurance.
Boom.
So it was a great source of capital. It was really the only source of capital he had because banks wouldn't lend to him, and he couldn't get. And he didn't want to partner with anybody.
Yeah.
So his only source of additional funding. And then once McDonald's grew in the late 60s, who do you think was their first lenders?
Wow, you're about to tell me.
2 life insurance companies. They acquired a $1.5 million loan in exchange for 20% equity of the company, which kind of sucked at the time. But they had no institutional funding other than local credit unions.
Yeah.
And local credit unions would loan on the buildings. And then their second batch of institutional fundings, life insurance loaned him $2.7 million to buy the McDonald's brothers out.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that
Very
was
cool.
And they kind of mentioned that in the movie. They say lenders, but they don't say it was a life insurance company.
Yeah.
So this is just more evidence that there's this undercurrent in the economy that's the base of it is life insurance.
Yeah, there's a lot of other big name entrepreneurs who've used life insurance at key points in their time to fund their own business growth.
So the reason we made this video is just to say that, Ray Kroc's 401k, even though they didn't exist then, did not fund a business empire.
Or his IRA, right?
Right. Or his savings account.
Yeah.
So to really grow and grow fast, you have to think outside the box and way outside the box. Okay, so they got to they were the leader in the...
Wait, first off, can I say I love this little...
I'm going to read it.
This little picture Jimmy's taken of the book and underlined, and you can see some of his scribbled notes on the side here. So
I mean, I could have typed it out, but I'm lazy.
Yeah.
So they got through the 60s, and now they're the leader in the burger business, right?
Okay.
And they went through some corporate restructuring. The Harry Sonnenberg, the BJ Novak character, he was gone because they went public, and he was too cautious at that point, and he became a bureaucrat.
Interesting.
So Kroc was like, I can't have any of this.
I mean, I think there is a time, there does need to be a not necessarily a switch that is flipped, but I think you do evaluate risk a lot different at different stages in your business or in your life, what have you. And, there is a time where I think it does need to be throttled up or back. So,
McDonald's would disagree with you.
Okay.
But I mean, I do think they throttled back in the 80s.
Yeah.
So, because in the 50s there was no fast food. In the 60s they're like, this is an idea that can work. And then they went public. And then Wall Street was like, oh, this can work. We got to do this.
Yeah.
And Harry Sonnenberg was like, no, it's time to throttle back. And Ray Kroc was like, no, go.
Yeah, I'm not saying that was the wrong decision.
I think that's the hard part of being an entrepreneur.
That is the question is like, at what point do you start taking chips off the table or do you keep doubling down?
And, Kroc seems like a fun dude, and he always doubled down.
Yeah.
And so... But after he died in '84, so after that they were able to kind of...
obviously, Monday morning quarterback, he was correct in doubling down.
And the Sonnenberg guy, he wasn't wrong because he was afraid of the stagflation that eventually did happen. He predicted it right, just wrong timing.
Yeah. Which
is another hard part about being an entrepreneur. You cap your exponential gains.
Interesting.
So, you ready for my scribbled notes?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. So Sonnenberg was gone, and then they put a new CEO in place, and then they also put Kroc kind of was sailing around the world, and so they had a new operations guy and a new finance guy, and the operations guy was cool. He was like, finance guy, do your thing. I'm not going to pay attention because I'm focusing on fries and marketing and burgers.
Yeah.
So, all right, here we go. Okay, so if Turner he took over for Kroc. So if Turner, and this is I'll even bring my mouse in.
Go ahead and read it.
Had Turner taken over finance, he would have raised much of the expansion money by selling McDonald's stock, which seemed to be the cheapest way of raising capital. My view was that stock financing was free money, Turner recalls. Boylan's views was diametrically opposed to that. It's a hard point to get across, but selling stock is the most expensive form of financing for a growth company, Boylan argues. By borrowing, you lock in a rate and eventually pay off the loan. But you are never through paying for equity financing because the dilution of the stock is permanent, and you pay dividends on new shares forever. When I was reading this a couple days ago in the morning, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, that's a revolutionary idea.
It's a very powerful...
I don't think Dave Ramsey would like that idea.
No, and it's it takes I guess a little bit more cojones, and you gotta have a long-term view of your company to really get what he's saying here. But basically, it's like it is going to put a little bit more pressure on your business in the beginning and the startup phases. And I think in the beginning of a business, it does make sense to give up some equity and bring in the right people, but at a certain point.
But not just for cash.
Not just for cash. You need cash.
The cash partner has to be bringing relationships or a skill set.
Experience, what have you. Yeah, to really, put the pedal to the metal. But as a business grows and gets further along and demonstrates success, equity has to be protected, fiercely, in my opinion.
And we're not making this video to say these guys are right and everything. We're not. There could be a survivorship bias there. We're bringing alternative ideas to the table and say they have worked.
Yeah.
So quick recap. Instead of selling stock and giving up equity and avoiding debt, they went into massive debt to keep. They were growing at about 100 a year. They went into growing 300 per year. So they just exploded. McDonald's IPO sold at $22.50 a share in 1965, and in 1985 it was worth $10,000. So they kept all of that because they just went into debt.
Yeah.
And then today it's worth $152, but there's been 5 stock splits, and I don't know how to calculate that shit.
Yeah.
A lender's a limited relationship that has an end date. A partner's an infinite relationship. So if you're going to enter into a business marriage, you better see what you're really giving up.
Yeah.
Because on Shark Tank, they're always like, that's crazy just to take on debt. And after reading this, I think there's a definite counter argument. So lessons learned at our friendly McDonald's. Traditional financial thinking says the creative financing deals and life insurance don't work. It actually doesn't work. Yeah. I majored in English, by the way. So here's an example of how one of the biggest corporations in the world use these strategies to build an empire. You can't necessarily be afraid to use other people's money, and don't necessarily favor an equity partner over a debt partner. So that's all I got.
Yeah, great.
I hope you enjoy the book. I would say it is recommended reading.
And definitely check out the movie The Founder.
Yeah.
Cool.